Bibliophiles of the internet, today I'm here to talk about one of my favorite things in the world, and that's queer sports books. I've been wanting to make a list like this for literal years. If you've been here for even a second, you know that queer sports books just give me purpose. If I hear a book is queer and has sports, there's nothing else I need to know. As always, this list is by no means exhaustive. I am definitely not setting out to name every single queer sports book that exists, but I am going to try and include as many as I can possibly think of in this space. I have a lot to get through, so I'm just going to dive right in, and on that note, I thought it would be fun to organize this list by sport, and I'm going to start with swimming, and the first book I thought of for that category is, of course, Obie is Man Enough by Schuyler Bailar. This is a middle grade story about a biracial Korean-American trans boy named Obie who's switching over to the boys' team because of his transition, which means a new pool, new teammates, and a new coach. As he's trying to adjust and make new friends, he's also dealing with a lot of criticism and hate from people who think that he cannot or should not compete. But no matter what, Obie is determined to become the best. This is one of my favorite books. It is so honest in its exploration of everything from transphobia to gender euphoria, and even though it does grapple with some very difficult topics, it's also incredibly hopeful and shows a young trans character surrounded by so much love and so much support. It's also a shining example of what allyship can and should look like. It provides a foundation for young trans readers especially to learn about their rights, their resources, and ultimately their beauty and their resilience. I could talk about this book for hours, but suffice to say it is well worth the read. Content-wise, it continues to be timely, unfortunately, but the messages of self-love, empowerment, and forgiveness are timeless. The other book I know about that would fit into this category is the upcoming Man o' War by Cory McCarthy. This comes out on May 31st. It's a coming-of-age story about an Arab-American trans boy named River who also swims, and apparently when he's visiting this soon-to-be-closed marine life park down the street, he has a chance encounter with a queer person that literally lands him in the shark tank. This experience sets off something deep within him and forces him to finally confront a lot of internalized homophobia and transphobia, ultimately leading him down a path towards his transition and finding true love. I just got an arc of this book actually. It was kindly sent to me by the author himself, so thank you to him for that. Admittedly, I don't really know how heavily the swimming element factors into the story, but it is depicted on the cover itself, so I assume it's a central theme to the story in some way. I hope to read this one soon. It's been getting really great reviews so far, and I'm really excited to dive into it and see what it's really about. Next, we're going to talk about ice sports, and I phrase it that way very purposefully to be more inclusive, but we're going to start with my current read, which is Icebreaker by Graziadei. This is a queer hockey book. It's about Mickey James III, an Italian-American hockey player whose father and grandfather famously attended the same college he's currently going to, and he's heavily favored to be drafted into the NHL as a first draft pick. Because of the extreme pressure that comes with that family legacy, he's also trying to navigate his own depression and anxiety, and on top of that he's having to deal with Jason, his most infuriating rival, competition, and teammate. I'm really enjoying this so far. It's a college-set YA story, which is really awesome, and it also takes the whole rivals to lovers energy to new heights. When the story starts, Jason and Mickey really do hate each other and deeply resent each other, and it's been fascinating to see how that slowly but surely gives way to attraction and romance. There's also a lot of really great conversations about privilege, entitlement, mental health, and what it means to really find your own path on your own terms. Speaking of queer hockey stories set in college, you know I couldn't make this list without mentioning Check Please by Ngozi Ukazu. Even though this story definitely does grapple with its fair share of emotional content, this is a much softer take on the queer hockey narrative. It's about Eric Biddle, also known as Biddy, who used to be a competitive figure skater, but now he's traded his ice skates for hockey skates. He's also an amateur baker and vlogger, and the story follows him starting his first year at Samuel University, where he's not only trying to conquer his fear of getting checked, but also trying to hide his budding attraction for the surly team captain. This is a top-tier comic series, and I think what makes it so special is that it brings together this interesting contrast between the aggression of hockey and the softness of Biddy as a protagonist. I think it's remarkable to have this series where someone as soft and vulnerable and kind as Biddy can exist and be celebrated as part of this hockey team for being exactly who he is and how he is, and not in spite of it. Even though hockey can be a pretty intense sport, the series isn't about the team trying to change or harden Biddy or stamp out his personality, and it just creates something really memorable because of how those two extremes can coexist. I do have another hockey book to mention as well, which would be Off the Ice by Avon, Gale, and Piper Vaughn. This is an adult MLM romance. I'm mostly mentioning it for posterity, not because I have personally read it. It's about a professional hockey player named Tristan who's trying to be realistic about the fact that his hockey career can't last forever, so on top of competing, he's also trying to finish his degree in business. While studying at Georgia State, he runs into a very attractive sociology professor, but he knows that he can't pursue him until after the conclusion of summer classes. Not only that, but if they do get together, Tristan will have to figure out how to navigate a relationship where he wants to stay in the closet for safety purposes, while Sebastian, his ex-professor, is very much not. Again, I haven't read this myself. I don't know how the power balance or imbalance is navigated or addressed. I can't say whether it's good or not, but it exists, and a lot of queer romance readers and reviewers seem to really enjoy this series. Rounding out this category on a very different note, we have Anna on the Edge by AJ Sass. I talk about this book all the time for very good reason. It's a queer middle grade story about a young non-binary skater named Anna who begins to feel some discomfort with her gender when her coach tells her that the concept of her new program is that she's a beautiful princess. So while she's struggling with that, she meets a new kid at the rink who happens to be trans, and when he mistakes Anna for a boy, she decides not to correct him and just explore that space. As their friendship grows, she learns so much more about identity, language, and labels, and she begins trying to find a way to genuinely express herself on the ice while still competing in a very gendered sport. This is one of my all-time favorite books. It is so incredibly generous in what it has to offer young readers, especially in the way of honoring the importance of self-discovery and exploration in a world where we're often not given the space to marvel in those things the way we should. It's also a story that understands how language and labels can bring people a sense of belonging or purpose, and how we are allowed to try on as many words, labels, and forms of expression as we want, and that doesn't make our journey any less. To say that I recommend this book is a massive understatement. Now we move on to football, and when I say football, I mean both the American sense and the non-American sense. First off, we have the Darius Duology, which begins with Darius the Great is Not Okay by Adib Khorram. This is a queer coming-of-age story about an Iranian-American boy named Darius, whose family is making their first ever trip to Iran to spend time with his grandparents while they still can. At the same time, he's dealing with his depression, body image insecurities, and he also meets a boy named Sorab who makes him feel so much more alive, and who makes Darius question everything he knows about himself, including his presumed straightness. I know on the surface this doesn't seem like a sports book, but during his time in Iran, Darius starts playing football with Sorab and his friends, and that's one of the many ways that they really connect. The football element also strongly carries over into the sequel, where Darius is back home in the States and he's finally made the JV soccer team, which he never would have tried out for had Sorab not reignited his love for the sport. This first book isn't really about romance, but instead it's about a deeply intimate and beautiful friendship that allows Darius to discover so much more about himself and really allows him to take ownership not only over his own culture, but also his feelings and his existence. Next, I want to flip-flop to American football and mention the upcoming Home Field Advantage by Dahlia Adler. I'm so excited for this. It's an FF romance about Amber, who dreams of becoming the head cheerleader, but her entire school and small town is rocked by tragedy when the star quarterback gets killed in a car accident. Watching him get replaced by the newcomer Jack is really hard for everyone, and when it's revealed that Jack is actually short for Jacqueline, all hell breaks loose. The football team refuses to fall in line and be led by someone who's not a guy, and the cheerleaders are also striking in solidarity with them, and they have a plan to bring Jack down. It becomes clear to Amber that if she hopes to have any future on the squad, she has to go along with his sabotage, except she starts to get to know Jack for real, and the feeling between them is about as far from animosity as you can possibly get. Like I said, I'm super stoked about this. I love that we're getting a queer sports romance that challenges gender roles and celebrates a butch main character, which we don't get to see often enough. I'm very intrigued, and I cannot wait to see how this romance plays out. Going back to the other football, I could not make this video in good conscience without bringing up Running with Lions by Julian Winters. I will live and die by this sports romance. It's about Sebastian, who's going into his senior year of high school, and he's finally been made captain of the soccer team, and he should be really excited about that going into their annual summer training camp. But he's actually kind of anxious and uncertain about what his future holds, and on top of that, his ex-best friend from childhood, Amir, has made a sudden reappearance, and the coach has put Sebastian in charge of bringing him up to speed. So Sebastian is determined to reconnect with Amir and make him a better player, but slowly gaining Amir's trust reveals that the feelings brewing between them might just be romantic. If you want to know why I love queer sports books, Running with Lions is a prime example, an ideal specimen in fact. This is a second chance rivals to lovers romance between former childhood friends. I feel like I shouldn't even have to say anything else. It's fun, it's romantic, it's heartfelt, it features an incredible cast of teammates who are just bonding and having a great time at this training camp. It makes me feel all the things, and I truly cannot recommend it enough. Then, of course, we have to talk about the Passing Playbook by Isaac Fitzsimmons. This is also a coming-of-age story about a young trans soccer player named Spencer who had a really bad experience at his old school, which is why he's transferring to a new one, and at his new school he's decided to go stealth since he mostly passes. He joins the boys' soccer team for the very first time in his life, and he's finally making friends. But he runs into a roadblock when he realizes that, according to Ohio law, he has to show proof of his birth certificate, which does not show his current and true gender, and that effectively and indefinitely puts him on the bench. So now he must decide whether to sit out the rest of the season and stay safe, or come out as trans and show the school board that he is not going down without a fight. This is another story that unfortunately remains extremely relevant, but I also love it because it never once places a judgment value on passing, being stealth, or being closeted in any sense. It shows how queer and trans people know our situations best, and whatever choice we make about being out or not being out is, by definition, the right choice. And of course, it also makes you think about the long-term effects of anti-trans legislation, and it also asks a lot of questions about how queer people with any amount of privilege can leverage that privilege to ensure that spaces are safe for other people who can't be or who don't want to be out. In my opinion, this story brilliantly marries that sports content with a budding romance and also social commentary. I really enjoyed it. This next one I haven't read myself, but I think it's worth mentioning, and that is Sidelined by Kara Beats. This is about Julian, who's a high school senior and captain of the football team, and he knows he has one shot to get a scholarship that will finally get him out of his small town. But he has to be diligent, work really hard, and keep his head down. Well, that plan goes to crap when his ex-best friend comes back into town, bringing their tumultuous history to the forefront. 3 years ago, Elijah was caught breaking into their coach's office, and Julian was the one who turned him in, and shortly after that, Elijah and his family left town without a trace. Now that they've been thrown back together, they will have to face up to their mistakes and navigate the secrets still brewing between them while also barreling towards an uncertain future, so they might have to lean on each other much more than they thought. Again, I haven't read this one. I don't know whether Elijah gets back on the football team or is just further complicating Julian's life with his already full plate as captain, but it's a second chance romance, and I'm a sucker for the reconciliation of former best friends, so I would definitely consider reading this one myself. Now we're moving on to basketball, and we're going to start with She Drives Me Crazy by Kelly Quinlan. This is supposed to be a sapphic rom-com about a basketball player named Scotty who loses a big game to her now ex-girlfriend right after their breakup, and immediately afterwards she gets into a fender bender with Irene Abram, her nemesis. Irene is a grumpy, stuck-up cheerleader. Obviously she's not happy about the accident either, but things get even worse when their moms get involved and force the two of them to carpool together until Irene's car gets fixed. Things get even bumpier between them as they spend more time together, but when Scotty sees a way to get back at her ex while also climbing the school's social ladder, she bribes Irene to play along with her little scheme. Again, we've got rivals to lovers, forced proximity, we've got fake dating according to the official synopsis, and school hijinks. Honestly, I'm sold. I haven't read this one yet, but it's definitely on my list. It sounds super tropey and delightful, and hopefully it really delivers on those promised rom-com vibes. Next I have another comic series, and that is The Avantgardes by Carly Usden and Noah Hayes. This is criminally underrated. It's a comic series about Charlie who transfers to this hippy-dippy art school with the intention of never picking up a basketball again, and she figures it won't even come up because the school most likely doesn't even have a team in the first place. But then a very cute, very charming girl named Liv tries to recruit her to the Avantgardes, and even though Charlie has sworn off the sport because of her past, she decides that she might as well give this ragtag crew a chance. This is such a fun and endearing series. It has an all-black cast of characters, and these teammates come from all different backgrounds and experiences. Not only are they different majors, but they range from cis to trans, queer to even more queer, and they have different body types and even different ways that they approach the game, but all of it works. This series has such a great feeling of friendship and camaraderie, but it's also just super funny and heartwarming and joyful and queer. The art style is fantastic, it's absolutely hilarious, you truly cannot go wrong with this series. My last category for this video is miscellaneous sports, and I say that not to devalue them, but because I didn't have more than one book for any of these sports to be able to break them up into different categories. First, we're going to start with cheerleading, even though, in fairness, Home Field Advantage and She Drives Me Crazy could very well be classified as queer cheerleading books, but the book I was specifically thinking of for this was Cheer Up, Love and Pom Poms by Crystal Frazier and Val Wise. This is a sapphic sports comic with a trans femme love interest. It follows Annie, who's kind of a troublemaker, and she's being pressured to clean up her act and join an extracurricular activity to better socialize herself and beef up her college apps in the process. So she joins the cheer squad and reconnects with an old friend named Bibi, a trans girl who has to keep up both her cheer performance and academic performance to keep her parents in support of her transition. As Bibi helps train Annie, the two of them realize that their friendship is as strong as ever, and it might also be blooming into something new. This is just a super enjoyable comic. Not only does it showcase a grumpy sunshine relationship dynamic, but it also makes tremendous strides in showing fat bodies, brown bodies, and trans bodies as being suited to athletic spaces. The story also sparks much needed conversation conversations about the hyper-visibility of trans feminine folks and how that can put trans women especially in a very vulnerable place. But at the same time, it's also a fun, sweet romance about two queer girls teaching each other how to embrace all the different parts of themselves. My next miscellaneous sport is Dodgeball, and for that we have Dodge City by Josh Trujillo and Kara McGee. This is a comic series about a young Latina boy named Tomas who joins the absolute worst-ranked dodgeball team known as the Jazz Pandas, who are willing to do whatever it takes to win the regional championships. When their leader abruptly hands the captainship over to Tomas in the middle of a tournament, he will have to do everything he can to rally his ragtag team and finally prove that they can beat the odds. There's so much to be enjoyed about this series. It has a Spanish-speaking Latina main character whose identity is sadly unknown since the series was discontinued. It has queer characters, characters of color, a fat deaf character, and so much more. And I just love the fight this team has. They're so different and so proudly weird, and they don't care what anyone else thinks. They don't look like typical athletes or even work like typical athletes, but that doesn't make their athletic ability any less. Even though this series was sadly cut short after 4 issues, I still really enjoyed it, and I would definitely recommend it. And the last series I have to mention for today is Fence by Joanna the Mad and C.S. Pacat. This is a comic series, but it also has novel adaptations. It's about a fencer named Nicholas, who is the scrappy, illegitimate son of a retired fencing champion, and he's worked all his life to be able to afford his training and get the chance to compete. He gets accepted to this elite private school on scholarship, I believe, where he finds out that his rival, Seiji Katayama, is not only his teammate, but also his roommate. It's no secret that I love this series very much. Both Joanna and CS have been very open about their love of sports anime and how that's definitely influenced the tone and style of this series, which definitely comes across. Again, this is a forced proximity, rivals to lovers sports romance between two idiots without a single brain cell to spare between the two of them. Is there any question as to why I love this? What's really dynamic about this series is that both Seiji and Nicholas have something to prove. They both have a chip on their shoulders. They both want to be the best. So they challenge each other and push each other physically and emotionally, and I think that's what makes their relationship so compelling. Beyond that, there's a bunch of team-building shenanigans, side romances, and both the comics and novels are just an absolute joy to read. They're both delightful and hilarious. So those are a bunch of queer sports books for you to read or look into or save for future reference. As I said to begin with, this is definitely not an exhaustive list, and I know for a fact that there's way more out there, so if you know of any that I didn't get a chance to mention here, feel free to add to the conversation and drop those in the comments. But that's everything I had to share for today. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, educate yourself, be kind to yourself, take care of yourself, and I'll catch you on the flip side of the page.